In this book, I set out to challenge the paradigm of forgetfulness, which shrouds the impact of the Troubles and its continuing aftermath in the Republic. The impact is felt most directly in An Garda Síochána and in society generally. One forms the very solid impression that nowadays all policies and responses in the policing and security framework are being discovered for the first time. It's as if the past simply did not exist and no lessons had been learned, no initiatives had been taken. This is an extremely short-sighted approach and is very much like a recurring Groundhog Day. Now, it's right, of course, that the Troubles' impact in Northern Ireland is very well recorded in all its detail, and that's very correct as it should be. But surprisingly so, the recording or the discussion or the discourse has not been recorded comprehensively in the Republic, and certainly not from within An Garda Síochána. We're well aware that those who fail to learn from history are absolutely deemed to repeat it. It is important that mistakes are learned from, and it's important that successes are recognised so that future policies can be so informed. In specific terms, this account is semi-biographical, it's partly historical, and largely draws on a vast body of knowledge and experience which has been compiled in the Republic of Ireland in relation to the policing by consent model which has been pursued by the Garda Síochána for over 100 years. I do remind myself constantly that in democracies, police and security services are shaped by the communities in which they serve, and so is the case in the Republic. So really, more rhetorically, what can we learn from the past and how should those lessons be applied to the future? If these remarks resonate with you, and I hope they do, please continue with this short video. You should find this book interesting and informative if you have ever wondered what really happened in the law and order space in the Republic during the Troubles. If you ever wondered how the key actors behaved, that was government, politicians, Gardaí, terrorists or criminals, foreign intelligence agencies, the media and the general public. If you ever wondered what the impact of the legacy is and where the future takes us now. The book itself runs to 477 pages, 145,000 words and 3,500 paragraphs. It also has a very detailed table of contents and a multi-page index. What follows are a few very few examples of the contents from the book of some key events, and these are just examples of thousands and thousands of the historical and of the experience achieved over that 50 years plus. These are the examples that we follow it, but they're merely examples. We're looking here at the book cover. Just carries the message: the Troubles come south, murder and mayhem. And there was murder and there was mayhem. And of course all of this kicked off from about 1968 on, but particularly from 1970, when the whole world in terms of law and order and stability in the south was affected by that dark cloud flowing down from the north. That's not in any way to diminish the suffering of the people who undergone a terrible time of discrimination and disadvantage in Northern Ireland. One of the classics and the worst atrocity of the Troubles, with a direct impact from the north, was the Dublin and Monaghan bombings of May 1974. We're looking here at a photograph of Talbot Street in Dublin, and we see a ubiquitous Garda sergeant, in this case Sergeant Tom Madden. You will note that he's in uniform, he's unarmed, and he's in the middle of the chaos that was Talbot Street. Now, it is very, very clear that the Lionists did not have the independent capacity to commit the Dublin bombings, the 3 car bombings which happened on the 17th of May 1974. Yes, they did have the capacity to commit the Monaghan bombing, which was typical of the type of bombing outrages that they had committed over that period of time and would revisit again at later stage. This is the classic worst case scenario one, but there are many other examples of the direct violent impact on the South from the Northern Troubles. It came in as somewhat of a surprise to me during last year, during the centenary celebrations of the Garda Síochána, that Many of my colleagues who are now in themselves retired had no particular knowledge of the events of 1970, the arms trial, the attempt by some government ministers and others to import arms to be sent north. All of that and the subsequent trials and the situation around it. The murder of Garda Richard Fallon on the 3rd of April 1970 by the Sayre Area gang, that this was a kind of a distant memory, something they were mildly aware of. And no criticism, it's just the passing of time erodes the memory of what happened, but one of the objects here is to, in detail, look at the arms trial in particular, and indeed the murder of Richard Fallon. The arms trial is pretty simple and straightforward. If one wants to do an analysis of it, which is done in the book, you simply follow the money. Follow the money, and the answer will be pretty clear where the money went. On the right-hand side, we're looking at the burning of the British Embassy in 1972. That's the burning of the embassy, which took place in Dublin, and it followed the bloody Sunday murders in Derry of 14 innocent civil rights marchers. And again, the emotion in the country was palpable, it was enormous, and indeed, you'll see there uniformed members of the Garda Síochána outside the embassy in Merrion Square. I was one of those guards, and I still remember the day and the sounds and the emotion that was there. That was a very seminal event. Just in passing as well to record that, rather curiously, North and South had a similar playbook for many generations up to the 1970s in relation to security. And even though both sides would probably deny it, both governments would deny it for obviously political reasons, the simple paradigm was, or the simple playbook was that when things got out of hand in, quote, Republican violence, and when the ordinary courts could no longer cope with the offences through intimidation or otherwise, internment was introduced. And internment was introduced both north and south in every single decade, right from the foundation of this state up to and including the 1960s. Incidentally, as we look at the photograph, we see Charles J. Haughey. Charles J. Haughey was the Minister for Justice in the 1960s when internment was in place here in the Republic. Now, this will come as a surprise to many people, but the very simple dynamic was that after the Bloody Sunday events in Derry and other events in terms of the civil rights protests in the north, it would have been politically impossible to introduce internment here, even though as a technical device it would have certainly taken a lot of the key players out of the equation early on, and they would not have had the capacity to sustain their period of revolt and the campaigns that followed. But it was impossible to introduce following Bloody Sunday and other events. It may seem maybe a little strange that when we're talking about, and I'm talking about the effect of the Troubles in the Republic, that we'll also be talking about life-saving and deaths on the road. The fact is that despite the enormous casualties and deaths and injuries from the terrorist campaigns, both north and south, the deaths on our roads for many years had been many multiples of the terrorist deaths. But however, as we reached the middle of the 1990s, it became apparent that it was possible that there would be a peace dividend. And for the Garda Síochána, that allowed the possibility of diverting resources and energies and planning to dealing with the road deaths, together with partners. This could not be achieved on its own, and there are three key factors in terms of the strategies that underpin road safety enforcement. Yes, the first is enforcement, which is a matter for the Garda Síochána. The education used to be a matter for the Department of Environment, but also now is in a different place, but clearly it is a clear part of the awareness, and engineering relates to the roads and their conditions. Paradoxically, the fastest roads in the country now are the motorways, and they're also the safest, so that is a part of the engineering dividend that arose. However, I was directly involved in setting up what was called Operation Lifesaver in 1997. And together with partners, the idea was that we would develop a strategy based on the best practice around the world. I went to Victoria in Australia, and they had a very impressive system there based on rapid automatic electronic speed detection systems. They also had a campaign dealing with seat belt wearing, a campaign dealing with drunk driving, and also dangerous and careless driving and the use of mobile phones. So we devised a plan to introduce an automated speed detection system, which was then called the GATSO system. It was an automatic van detection system. The current equivalent is the GoSafe cameras that you see around in vans around the country, and this was a highly effective and efficient system, and it raised a very important thing when one talks about any behaviour. It raised the possibility that if you drove excessively fast, or if you drove without your seatbelts, or if you were involved in drunk driving or dangerous driving, there was a very high probability that you would be detected. And I guess the strongest changer, at least in the short term, of human behaviour is the possibility of consequences and unpleasant consequences. Bearing in mind at all times that the consequences should be proportionate to the behaviour. That system was extraordinarily effective, and it, in relation to speeding in particular, the use of these GATSO detection vans allowed for a rapid and flexible system of speed detection, meaning that one could shift the resources to the point of greatest need if there was an outbreak or a change in behaviour in a particular part of the country, whether it was Donegal or Cork or Dublin. You could move mobile detection devices to deal specifically with that area. Now that is no longer possible because in the middle 2000s, the decision was taken take away that automatic speed detection almost exclusively from the guards and award a very lucrative contract to a private contractor to do the same thing. But one extraordinarily important difference is that the contractors which now carry the GoSafe logo are only permitted to mount their detection points at prefixed and predetermined locations, and they are not allowed to have a flexible approach. So it is a totally different approach to the detection of speeding as an influencer or a cause of road deaths and road injuries. Now, obviously, when one looks at the figures here on the table right, one sees that the road deaths in 1997 were 472 and in 2022 was 156. Now, this year has been a particularly bad year so far, and 126 people have been killed on the roads up to the 1st of September. But I think the main point I'm making here, which comes from the peace dividend, is that extraordinary progress was made in saving lives and preventing injuries. But somewhere along the middle course, a decision was taken to privatise that activity, which certainly reduced a very important part of any detection strategy. That is the idea of flexibility, adaptability, and at relatively short notice. That is gone. And that is a huge deficit in the current road safety speeding detection system. 2014 was a seminal year in the history of the Garda Síochána, in the history of the Department of Justice and all of the key players involved. A lot of it revolved around the so-called Sergeant Maurice McCabe scandal and the whistleblower implications. But the result of that, which saw many powerful and influential figures adopting different roles and some seemingly contradictory ones as well, are fully discussed in the book. But a policy arose from that time forward in government in relation to any of the strategic influence for the Garda Síochána itself. It should be anyone but Garda who would be at the very top of the organisation. And it became a kind of a paradigm within the thinking and within the media. And of course, a lot of what was good was forgotten in the process. But from 2014 onwards, there was and still remains probably a significant reluctance to recognise the historical experience of the Garda Síochána and also to recognise the absolute understanding of what a national police and security service is in terms of its integrity and its leadership. All of this is discussed and different ideas are explored in the context of the book. 2014 was the commencement of a long period of dysfunction and disarray. And it was also the ostensible start of the anything but Garda government policy. And much of this was motivated by the Smithy Tribunal, which reported late in 2013 and got discussion in 2014. And it coincided with a number of other events, including a review of the Department of Justice. But going back to the Smithy Tribunal, that was the one that was set up to examine suggestions of collusion with the killers of Chief Superintendent Harry Breen and Superintendent Bob Buchanan in 1989, and alleged collusion by members of the Garda Síochána or other state actors. This and many other associated areas are discussed in detail in the book, but just for the purpose of this exercise, there were three significant witnesses. Well, more correctly, there were two witnesses and one non-witness before the Smithy Tribunal. One was Freddie Scapitici, otherwise known as Steakknife. He was the British Army agent within the Provisional IRA, and he was a significant, if not the significant, figure within the Provisional IRA's Nothing Squad, their execution and torture squad. His lawyers were paid €382,270 so that he could claim that he wasn't Steakknife. Now, he did not give evidence, but he certainly met with the Smithy team. He did not give evidence before the Smithy Tribunal, and this extraordinary event was allowed to happen where his lawyers, this notorious agent, his lawyers being paid €382,270 to prove that he was not Steakknife. The second witness was Peter Keeley / Kevin Fulton, also another British Army agent who had infiltrated the Provisional IRA, and very successfully so, in the Newry and Dundalk and South Down area. He again is, by his own admission, a liar. He is before a number of different judicial proceedings in the other jurisdiction at the present time, and he is a liar by his own admission. Yet Judge Smithy thought he was somebody that could be relied on, because he sat beside the good judge for 3 days, and he was satisfied that his story was credible, or at least credible in parts that fitted the paradigm of collusion. And again, his lawyers were paid €456,645, an astronomical sum for this disassembler. The other witness of note was the then Assistant Chief Constable of the PSNI, Drew Harris, later Deputy Chief Constable of the PSNI, and subsequently in 2018 Commissioner of Garda Síochána. And now again, Mr. Harris's involvement with the Smithy Tribunal is described in detail. At one stage, his evidence was described by counsel for the Garda Síochána as nonsense on stilts. I go into the other areas in the book in great detail, and I think it is perfectly logical to adopt the position that a member of the police and security services of another state would not be appointed the head of police and security for this state. And that's a rule that runs right across the Rubicon, and it is as true in Great Britain and as it is in Europe or elsewhere. I don't plan to go into the other areas involving Commissioner Harris or his policing model that he has been operating here since 2019, and in my view that this is a very, very poor policing model, particularly in the area of uniform policing. And again, it is covered in great detail in the book, and I invite you to read and to comment and to agree or disagree, but at least to be informed of what the key facts are, because in this and other matters my comments are very factually based. The opinions come later, but the comments are very factually based. At the start of this video, I said I was challenging the paradigm of forgetfulness, the idea that there is no historical memory, no corporate memory of the good things as well as the bad things in the past. Now, if you have come this far with me, and I hope you have, The Troubles Come South, this book is most certainly for you. You can order it from lettertechbookstore.com, or from jaobrien.ie, or indeed you can phone 01 254 8442. I think you will find it interesting and riveting. You may not agree with everything, that is also fine, but at least we can have the debate based on facts and certainty. And hopefully we've upset the diet of forgetfulness that seems to have pervaded much of the last number of years. Thank you very much for your attention.